Hi, everybody. Welcome to the April 29th, 2016 edition of Colorado Inside Out. I'm your host, Dominic Dezzutti. Thank you very much for joining us. Let's get a quick take on Sports Authority announcing this week that it will close all of its doors, leaving the naming rights for Mile High Stadium in doubt for next season. Patty Calhoun from Westward. Is Westward newspaper in the mix for the possible $6 million a year naming rights?
Oh, I'm pretty sure we are in the mix, but actually there is an industry that is contributing a great deal to us that is perfect. Let's face it, just leave the Mile High Stadium name. It has a dual meaning now. Yeah. It has history behind it, it has current commerce behind it.
And then finally you would have a business embracing the Mile High name. They really wouldn't want to mess with that much at all.
Right, exactly. You could leave it exactly as is.
It's a great idea. David Copel from the Independence Institute and DU Law School. This is the second company with naming rights to Mile High that is now bankrupt. Is the stadium cursed? Should it just be left Mile High Stadium?
It should be named after who actually paid for it, which was not Sports Authority or Invesco. They put in a little bit of money, and it certainly wasn't the Denver Broncos, those multimillionaires and above in their ownership, who are, I respect for their talent, but shouldn't be on welfare. The people who paid for this were the Colorado taxpayers. So let's name it after them. Colorado Taxpayers Field at Mile High Stadium.
Not much of a ring, but I like the idea. Eric Sonren, political analyst. Is this still a big deal nowadays? I realize the national exposure when a game is going on, but locally, it's still Mile High. I think it's going to be Mile High forever. What do you think?
Per David's point, maybe we should just go with Doug Bruce Field. I mean, the paragon of Colorado taxpayers. I think your point is right, Dominic. I think it's not quite as salient as it was 15 years ago when, John Hickenlooper embraced the issue, Wellington Webb, and then Mayor embraced the issue of keeping a corporate name off it. Everyone has corporate names now. I'm reading in professional basketball, we're now going to corporate logos on uniforms, all on NASCAR, which I think is a step toward the apocalypse. But given the history of Invesco and now Sports Authority, that once you put your name on the stadium, it does seem to be a death wish and you go out of business. I'm hoping Frontier Airlines will maybe grab these naming rights.
Wrapping up the panel, we have Kristen Wyatt from the AP. Thank you very much for joining us. What do you think? Do you think there's some companies out there ready to bid on these rate naming rights?
Oh, absolutely. I think the NFL wouldn't consider the marijuana industry yet. But there was a bill that dropped in the legislature this week to make them keep the Mile High name on that stadium. And I think that bill doesn't make any sense because nobody would be so silly. They would always name it blank at Mile High Stadium. They're going to keep it in there somewhere. So I don't think it's really worth worrying about too much.
You're saying there was a silly bill proposed?
Yeah, exactly.
That's nuts. Well, I'm glad we have an expert like you to let us know what's going on. The presidential primary races in both parties took significant turns this week. After a sweep of 5 Northeast states, Donald Trump turned his attention to Hillary Clinton, saying that she is playing the woman card, and if she were a man, she wouldn't get more than 5% of the vote. Meanwhile, Ted Cruz named Carly Fiorina as his running mate, despite his distant second-place status. Patty, it kind of feels like I used the Onion as a source this week, but I didn't. This is actual real life and real news. Take your pick from all these crazy things that happened this week.
Well, and it got crazier. I was in a New York hotel room watching CNN where they replayed and replayed and replayed, because it's a money-saving operation, the Donald Trump sound clip when they asked him to explain how she was using the woman card, which should be fairly easy. Like, she's a woman. She has people supporting her who say you've got to vote for a woman. That doesn't mean you shouldn't vote for a woman, but he could not explain himself. And if he can't explain this, I don't know what he can explain. For a good example of using the woman card, you only had to stay tuned to the TV station for another couple hours when all of a sudden Cruz really did use the woman card when he pulled out Carly Fiorina as his vice presidential running mate, which is not going to save his campaign. That took more weird twists. Now we have the devil, everyone who equated him with the devil later this week, and that really excellent quote from Tim Kaine, who just said, I think, Lucifer is doing it. You did a disservice to Lucifer comparing him to Cruz. Was it Boehner? Boehner. Boehner compared him to the devil. Tim Kaine said you did the devil a disservice.
Okay. I see. Either way, not exactly Ted Cruz's finest hour, especially mucking up the Hoosiers thing in Indiana. That's hard to really recover from. David, is the move by Ted Cruz to name Carly Fiorina a VP candidate this far away from a convention that he's in distant second place too little, too late?
No, I think you play with the cards you have on any given hand, and under the circumstances, it was a wise move. But instead of talking about Donald Trump's latest verbal thing, I'd like to put it in perspective. If it's a Trump-Clinton race, it'll be the first time in the history of public opinion polling when both major party candidates are disliked, and for excellent reasons, by majorities of the electorate. In my view, never since the first presidential election have we had let's say they were the candidates, would you have a pair like that who are both so obviously unfit for any position of public trust? Put aside their policies. It's their evil, loathsome characters that make them fit for any position in a republic. And it's a sign of the degeneration of this country as we become more and more like either the Weimar Republic or, more precisely, the closing decades of the Roman Republic before it turned into a dictatorship because of the decline of the public's civic virtue, that both major parties could nominate people who, as everyone can tell, are highly corrupt and lie as easily as they breathe. Both of them are fierce enemies of the First Amendment and have made no bones about that. And I can't predict all of the lies that either of them would tell as president, but I can guarantee you what the first lie will be, which will be the moment they take the oath and they say, "I will, to the best of my ability, preserve, protect, and defend the Constitution of the United States of America." To the contrary, they are both enemies of our constitutional republic.
Eric, it's probably hard to hear David sugarcoat it like that, not really take a stand. I've heard more people voice opinions like David just iterated, and what I'm wondering and asking you is, now that we're closer to, I think, people maybe accepting, but the reality of that it's going to be Trump-Clinton, do you think more Republicans are going to be held, their feet held to the fire by what Trump is saying because he's going to be top of their ticket?
Yeah, I mean, to David's point, I sometimes disagree with David. I might express that viewpoint in this case in a slightly less caffeinated way, but I don't fundamentally disagree with David's point. Peggy Noonan had a terrific column recently on what this country is waking up to, that the two of them are going to be our standard bearers. I flash back 8 years ago in the McCain-Obama race, and there was a great editorial in The Economist basically saying no matter if you're cheering for one side or the other, you can't argue that these are two fine men, that these are some of the best of what the country has to put forward. And no one can look at Donald Trump and Hillary Clinton and say, this is out of 310 million Americans, this is the best this country has to offer. That's a very sad commentary. Of course, Republicans, from dog catcher to Congress to state legislative candidates, are panicked beyond words at the thought of Donald Trump being at the top of the ticket and what that might mean. We're going to talk about the Colorado Senate race in a minute, but the fundamental issue in the Colorado Senate race on the Republican side is it a nomination worth having to run against Michael Bennet? And with Trump at the top of the ticket, Bennett's a tough incumbent to begin with Trump at the top of the ticket, who knows if it's a nomination worth having? It strikes me that Republicans at the moment, I think the whole process with Donald Trump has been akin to Elizabeth Kubler-Ross's, I don't know if you remember her treatise years ago, The 5 Stages of Dying, The 5 Stages of Grief, and you start with denial, and then you go to bargaining, and I can't remember all 5 stages, and the final stage is ultimate acceptance, and that's where it strikes me most Republicans are. They're grieving that Donald Trump is going to be their nominee, but they're starting to accept the fact that that's the way the cards are being dealt, and there isn't really an out.
Kristen, with your time on Capitol Hill, what kind of reaction are you seeing from lawmakers from both sides of the aisle?
Well, I like state legislatures because everything happening nationally always plays out in a state legislature, and we're definitely seeing that here. There is some serious gnashing over how to change our presidential nomination process. I think, to everyone's point, I agree with everyone, both parties are going to take a serious long look about how they nominate candidates, what you have to do to become the nominee, and whether that they are putting forward the best candidates in November. So you're definitely seeing smaller versions of that debate here, both in the U.S. Senate race here and both in like little piddly county commissioner races about how do we nominate people. Is it only the insiders? There's a lot of backlash in both parties against presumed elites or the moneyed interests, but both parties don't really have great ideas for how to move past that.
The Republican U.S. Senate primary in Colorado took a variety of wild turns this week. John Kaiser won his battle in court to appear on the ballot after coming up 86 signatures short last week. Meanwhile, Ryan Frazier and Robert Blaha are expected to go to court as well, since they were both found to have insufficient petitions on Thursday. David, let's start with John Kaiser. Now that he's won the battle in court, got us back on the primary ballot, how much does that court fight hurt him?
Zero. It was of great, I'm sure it was caused him a great deal of stress and probably turned some hairs prematurely gray for him. But no, he's on the ballot now, and he's a formidable candidate within this context. And you know, if you judge it by how Progress Now, which always has sincere views and thoughtful things, he's the one that makes them panic the most, which was, you know, remember that the day Cory Gardner announced, they immediately said our biggest objective, you know, now is to stop Cory Gardner, because they accurately perceived the threat that he posed. And they've seemed to be saying the same thing about him so far, so that's a good indication. The only thing that I think saves Trump, the Republicans, perhaps from a wipeout in Colorado and elsewhere, is that even while Trump really could be the first presidential candidate to lose all 50 states, you know, he'll have to fight to hold states like Arizona, Mississippi, and Utah, which should be in the bag. He'll make George McGovern and Barry Goldwater look like titans, but he's running against Hillary Clinton, who is also highly disliked, whereas those other things, running against Nixon in '72 or Goldwater or Lyndon Johnson in '64, it's, you know, those were at the time seen as sort of moderate, respectable people who you could cross the lines for. Hillary's, I think, a different thing. So it's not inconceivable a Republican could win this race. They're obviously going to start with close to zero name recognition in the general electorate, and we will see how they do at introducing themselves to the public.
Eric, you've been watching and analyzing politics for a long time. Have you ever seen any primary season like this for the U.S. Senate Republicans?
Not for the U.S. Senate Republicans, not for presidential level. No, there hasn't been a primary season like this. I think we can stipulate to that fact. Just to David's point very quickly, yes, Trump is going to he has a very steep hill to climb to be a competitive presidential candidate. The map is more locked in, I believe, than David implies. We have now seen this ossified red and blue map. And no, Donald Trump is not going to have to work to hold Arkansas or Mississippi. Those are red states. I think it does put some states in play, the Georgias perhaps, the Arizonas perhaps, some other states that have been red, if not bright red states, that might be in play this cycle. But it will not be a wipeout akin to McGovern or Goldwater, simply because there aren't wipeouts of that magnitude anymore, just given the manner in which we've sorted into red and blue camps in this country. To the Senate race, the requirements for getting on this ballot by petition are pretty tough, and I think that's what we saw this week. Both the stipulation that you have to have, I believe it's 1,500 valid signatures in each of 7 congressional districts. And if you hit that bar in 6 out of 7, that's not good enough. You have to hit that bar in 7 out of 7. And even more, that once the first petition batch is in, which was candidate Jack Graham's petition batch, anyone who signed his petition is therefore ineligible to be counted as a signatory on any succeeding petition. So it pays off to go first, and those who went last, I think Frazier turned his in last, are having to draw their signatures from a shrinking pool. It is a tough requirement. I think it's arguably maybe a little too tough. I'm going to be curious whether Blaha and or Frazier can win their legal challenge, whether they have as good a case as Kaiser had in front of a judge. And I don't know what the timing of that is. My understanding today, Friday, is the deadline for certifying that primary ballot. So I don't know if they're in front of judges as we tape this show midday on Friday, trying to get a ruling before the end of the day, or if somehow today's deadline is going to be pushed down the road for 48 or 72 hours.
To my knowledge, and I don't have this verbatim, but to my knowledge that the Secretary of State's office will be able to push back at least the U.S. Senate primary part of the ballot, and won't need to certify that for a couple of weeks. It's like the first deadline. But yeah, it's the Frazier and Ryan Frazier and Robert Blaha only have 5 days to dispute the point. So we'll know at least by this show next week. Kristen, as you look at this, is there a happier guy this week in America than Michael Bennett?
No, the guy, the born into wealth, the son of a diplomat, can the guy catch a break? But to David's point, John Kaiser has zero name ID, but don't forget, in 2010, in a midterm election, there was a Denver school superintendent, rich guy that had some fancy friends. Nobody heard. That guy never ran for dog catcher, and he won in a very Republican year. But I think what's interesting about all this petition hubbub, I think this is really going to change the nomination process for the GOP. The petition process was originally seen as a kind of a grassroots workaround, the insiders at the assembly of getting close to the people. Today, it's like write a check to a petition gatherer, peace out, save yourself the time as long as you have the money to do it. I think the lesson from this GOP Senate primary is going to be do the work early, be Daryl Glenn, go around, go to the crappy chicken dinners and the JJ dinners, not the JJ dinners, the Lincoln Day dinners, with all the Republicans, and really get out to all the counties and meet people, because that's the easiest way to get on the ballot.
And I think you're absolutely right. I mean, conventional wisdom said Tim Neville was going to be who we're going to talk about right now, and right now he'd love to be talked about on the show. So I guess he just did. So there we go. Patty, even though we don't know about Frazier and Blaha at this point, who do you consider the front runner?
Well, I think at this point, I think Kaiser has a good chance on this. He's well spoken. He already has battled. He's won on this, but we have so many more chapters to go on this. Last week, I think I said, our lesson from the convention was next time you should petition your way on. Well, now we see maybe that's not the lesson anymore. One lesson would definitely be to not only have go to the chicken dinners, but hire Dick Wadhams. That's your first lesson. Because paying $100,000 to a petition gatherer might not do it. We talked earlier in the year when we were going to force high school students to take the civics class and pass this test in order to live in Colorado. Every Coloradan should be doing this now. What are people doing signing more than one petition for their Senate candidate? Everyone needs a quick lesson in how the primary works, how the caucuses work, and how the petitioning process works.
Mm-hmm. Denver Public Schools and state education officials are at odds this week over an animated video that DPS released. The video seeks to dispel what it calls a myth that DPS is flush with taxes from marijuana sales. State officials said that DPS doesn't have those funds because it never applied for the grants in the first place. Eric, this feels like that DPS is prepping for a mill levy increase.
No.
I know you're shocked.
No.
I'm glad you're sitting down when I say this really in-depth analysis. Is this the right way to go about what they consider dispelling a myth?
I don't know if it's the right way to go about it, but your analysis is dead on. I don't have a whole lot to add. This is everything about a coming bond and mill levy election. Those elections traditionally for DPS have passed like a knife through warm butter. The Denver electorate is very tax friendly, and particularly very DPS tax friendly, and the numbers are usually in the high 60s or 70%. Yet in this crazy year defined by Donald Trump, defined by a lot of other wackiness, everyone is running scared on these issues. DPS is included in that. They're running scared. They're worried about some notion out there that now that we have a robust marijuana industry, that all public tills are full and fat and happy. Both sides were right. Mark Ferrandino was right as the DPS chief financial officer in that the best program is really not designed for districts like DPS. The state was right that DPS hasn't applied. If it were to apply, it's probably going to get crumbs as opposed to huge dollars toward this program. But this is all about setting the stage for a campaign this fall.
Kristen, do you think there is much of a myth to dispel, if indeed there is one?
Absolutely. I think people have this perception that we are rolling in dough from the marijuana industry. First off, it's still a fraction of alcohol, always will be. And second of all, there is a list as long as your arm of people with their hands out. If I was doing an ad, if I was doing the DPS ad, I would have started with a shot of pigs at the trough, because that is what marijuana money is. Cops want money for enforcement. We all expect things like pesticide testing and things that do not exist, and they got to pay for it with something. So I don't fault anybody that's looking for increased revenue to point out to folks, pot does not solve all our problems. Even though it went to education, the excise fund is only a small portion of the overall taxes that you pay when you go to the pot shop. Most of the dollars you give them in tax is not for the best funding. So I think it's an important point to make to people that doesn't solve everything.
Patty, if there is a myth or a belief out there that there is a lot of tax money to be used for marijuana for schools, is an animated video the right strategy for DPS to use?
Well, I would say the first step should be hiring a fact checker and make sure you actually have applied for the money so that they can't be slapped back the way they just were. The DPS is not good at checking its facts right now. Let's not forget what just happened with the appointed board member. This is, I would say, not as major as that one, but it is a second blunder where they just didn't have all their ducks in a row before they went public.
David, wrap it up for us.
I think the main point of this video was correct, because even if they had applied, there's really not that much money, and so it's a big deal to the money available for marijuana taxes for school construction. Could be a lot for a small school district. It's like, oh, we can put a new roof on this one building because we only have 4 buildings. But for something at the size of DPS, even if they applied, it would be very small compared to what they consider their needs to be. So, and I would say based on Mark Ferrandino's previous record as Speaker of the House, he is accurate in terms of thorough knowledge of budget issues. Not very responsible, but how to actually spend the taxpayers' money, but in terms of knowing where it's going, he's on top of it.
Let's get a quick take on this last topic. The Denver Post told its staff on Thursday that it intends to cut another 20% of its newsroom staff in a second round of buyouts in the last 12 months. Denver Post CEO Mac Tully told staffers that the newsroom will be reorganized and work style and jobs will change. Kristen, let's do a short take on this one, but not good news from Denver's major single daily.
Absolutely, and a big customer of the Associated Press. Now, your heart goes out when anybody is losing their jobs, but I'm a little more optimistic about the media industry than some would suggest. Maybe not in the newspapers, but there's a lot of websites, there's a lot of very fascinating work and a lot of exciting young journalists doing really exciting work in journalism these days, and I think there is opportunity. Maybe a newspaper model isn't the one, and that's sad to see, but I don't think there's reason to think there's not going to be a good way for people to find out information about what's going on around them.
Patty, are we going to recognize the Post in a year?
No, well, I hope we even see it to recognize it. We would not recognize it from 10 years ago when the newsroom had 330 people, and now we're going to go down to about 100. This is depressing, and sadly, it is not just the dailies that are doing it in Denver and around the country. We're seeing cutbacks at TV stations. We are seeing many fewer journalism positions. So it's great that there are other options, but let's make sure those options can pay for themselves. We don't want to lose more.
David, what do you think? Is this going to at least help stem the tide? Hopefully this reorganization can lead to something that can be profitable?
People in this country think they're entitled to something for nothing. They think they're entitled to news from, say, the Denver Post without paying for a subscription. And yeah, you have to look at these little ads, but the economics are that the revenue from those ads doesn't come close to what the revenue used to be from the print ads. And of course, you actually had to pay for the newspaper to buy it. They likewise think they're entitled to Social Security and Medicare and all that, which is fine, but you have to have, if you want all this without any cuts or reforms, then we have to have huge tax increases to have it. But nobody wants to do that. So we've doubled the national debt in the last 2 years. The country's headed off a fiscal cliff, and that's a macro problem of the same reason that traditional newspapers are getting hit so hard.
Eric, we have a situation where we already have a decimated newsroom in the Denver Post. It's the only daily in town. We're going to start seeing some effects of that even further in what we talked about here around this table.
Yeah, I mean, we've seen the effects. One newspaper is gone, has been gone now for half a dozen years or so. The other newspaper, the Post, is a shell of its former self. I have to wonder whether this news that this was coming precipitated maybe Greg Moore's decision to leave 6 or 8 weeks ago, having been through one round of layoffs after another. If there's any good news here, and I'm being very tongue-in-cheek, it's that a 20% cut of a lower base.
Right.
It's fewer and fewer bodies all the time. I'm obviously being tongue-in-cheek. Kristen is right. It's sad for a lot of talented journalists who either have to find a new line of work or a new outlet for the content, and often excellent content that they generate.
Let's get to our favorite part of the show, Disgrace of the Week. As always, Patty, start us off.
Well, I took the University of Colorado, not going to University of Colorado A-line train last Saturday, really early in the morning, which was great. It was a fabulous ride. Got to DIA, and security, thank you, TSA, 90 minutes, no explanation. They have got to get that in order.
Wow. David.
Paramount Pictures, which claimed copyright over the Klingon language, which first appears in Star Trek, and happily there is the folks on the other side are fighting back, and then an amicus brief in behalf of the Klingon speakers was written in part in Klingon. And as I would say in Klingon to Paramount, Hab Slosel Kuch, which means in Klingon, your mother has a smooth forehead. Very serious insult.
We've had some good insults around this table. That's one more of the original ones. Eric.
How do you follow that? Let's go with former House Speaker Denny Hastert. There is so much wrong with this situation. He deserves everything he's getting. But it's not only the abuse that he committed decades ago. How does somebody who started with very few resources by virtue of public service amass the kind of fortune he amassed in order to pay whatever this was, blackmail money or hush money or whatever it was? There is much wrong with every tangent of this.
Kristen.
I'm going to keep it home right where I lie. I'm going to call out all 100 members of the Colorado legislature. The House was there till almost midnight last night debating this primary bill over and again, whatever the topic, whatever side, if it's Tabor, if it's oil and gas restrictions, if it's beer in the grocery store, they hate the idea of the public doing anything. And this primary debate, one side was folks saying we have to do this because otherwise the pesky public will do it. The other side said, let's not do it, even though the pesky public might do it. So nobody said, hey, if people want to do this thing, maybe we should talk about doing this thing. So I think they just get really tone deaf in there and don't consider the possibility that anybody could write law better than them.
Let's say something nice about somebody very quickly. Patty?
Well, Union Station, what a success. I was there last Saturday, doors open, Denver, the train. It is working out splendidly.
David?
Colorado Representative Jared Polis, whose bill to say that law enforcement can't get your emails that are over 6 months old without a search warrant passed the House this week.
Eric?
In-house, the producer of this program, Gabrielle Bryant, on a fast track, part of a program this weekend on women in journalism with a couple titans of the industry, including Channel 4's Ronalda Muse from years and years ago. Way to go, Gabrielle.
Here, Kristen.
And I'm going to also keep it home. I'm going to congratulate the Lieutenant Governor nominee, Donna Lind. She had her first confirmation hearing this week. She started out saying, I've climbed all the 14ers and I've skied every resort from Hesperus to Steamboat Springs, and everybody loved it. So she's doing on a fast track, I think, to the nomination.
That's all the time we had tonight. Thanks for tuning in. As always, be sure to check out our podcast on iTunes and for our CIO postgame segment on Twitter and Facebook. For everyone here at Channel 12, I'm Dominic Dezzutti. Thanks for watching. Good night.